he's watching you.
Okie dokie. All right, to get us started, today we are covering the female reproductive system, picking up where we left off last week, covering the male reproductive system. So all those fun questions you guys have been saving. All right, so gross anatomy, the large basic parts: uterus, fallopian tubes, which are also called oviducts, and the ovaries. The ovaries are the endocrine reproductive glands, analogous to the testes. These are the ones that are producing, well, first of all, let's start at the beginning. They are the ones that are storing all of the unfertilized and as yet, how do you say, unripened eggs. They hold the eggs as they mature, and then when they are finally mature, they burst out of the ovary, very brutally, I must add, and then find their way into the next structure, which is the fallopian tube or oviduct. Oviduct is telling you it is an egg tube. It is a tube for the egg to leave the ovary and migrate its way down into the uterus. The uterus is a light bulb shaped organ. You have the large main portion called the body, and then you have, I believe it's the narrowing end called the fundus, which is a fun word, fundus. Let me see, hold on one second. Let me get my screens situated right quick. Okay. So, and I lost my place. Sorry, I'm having screen difficulties just trying to get my stuff organized here. Okay, here we go. So the ovaries are located near the lateral walls of the pelvic cavity in females. This is the site of egg production. Even though females are born with all of the ova that they will ever require in their life, way, way more than you will ever require in your lifetime, they do not all become mature, but one per month. So one egg kind of matures every month, bursts forth, and goes on to live its best ovi life. Females are born with all the oocytes she will have for life. Primary ovocytes are stored in what are called the primordial follicle, which is a really fancy way of saying they're just kind of embedded in there, and they stay there for most of their lives until one of them, luckily, randomly, is the one that happens to receive the luteinizing hormone and the follicle stimulating hormone. So that one becomes the egg that ripens that month for ovulation. Typically, the body will alternate between maturing an ovum from the right and then from the left the next month. So generally you will kind of alternate back and forth. However, that is what is typical. Some women have what they call a lazy ovary, which is where one ovary is producing more month over month than the other one. Or you may have a bum ovary altogether, which is you're just relying on one to produce all the eggs, and the other is just, for decoration. So the oviducts, or the fallopian tubes, and again, welcome to anatomy. Everything has 5 different names. Oviduct is the more technical medical name. Fallopian was the guy who discovered them, so he named them, right? Dr. Fallopian. So the uterine tubes carry a mature ovum, one mature ovum every month, from the ovary to the uterus. One end is open and is in close contact with the ovary. So this nice little illustration here shows you these weird little kind of fibrillary bodies, these kind of things reaching out. The idea is you want to create kind of a funnel so that as the egg ruptures, it is kind of led into the tube. These guys have little cilia that are kind of keeping the fluid flowing with a current, so that we keep all of the eggs kind of flowing into the fallopian tube. And again, I will show you a much better illustration of this in just a few minutes. The other end is attached inside the uterus. So once you are in the tube, it's like a traffic tunnel. Once you're in the tunnel, you can't turn around. There's no other way to go. The tubes have, again, lots of cilia, lots of little small hairs, which are all beating with the same rhythmic pattern, which keeps the fluid moving in a single direction, emptying out into the body of the uterus. This is the most common site for fertilization. So generally, when the egg and sperm come together, this is the location that it happens in. The fertilized egg then continues its path down into the uterus for implantation. Now, the uterus is the convention center where we are throwing this whole party. And every month we prepare for the party, anticipating a fertilized egg by increasing the width of the uterine walls. They become engorged with blood. We start to produce an endometrial lining, which again is very nutrient rich, blood vessel laden, and it's just giving a really nice ripe spot for that fertilized egg to come in and embed itself in the wall of the uterus. Now, the body is preparing itself for pregnancy every month. However, most months, pregnancy does not come. And like most hormonal people in fits of rage, we rip the streamers off the wall and we snatch off all the tablecloths, we rip down all the decorations, the uterine lining begins to shed. And as it breaks apart in clumps, it starts to fall off the uterine wall. This leads to bleeding. As you know, when you rip a layer of something off of something else, it tends to bleed. This is the menstrual blood, and why the menstrual blood is not the same like typical consistency of blood. That's why it tends to be a little bit thicker. And forgive me for using the word, but kind of clumpier. Those are chunks of the menstrual wall that are being shed off. Now, once all of that stuff has been shed out, right, menstruation is complete. The body will take a little bit of time to recover, but then we start decorating for the next party, bro. And then those hormones tick up again, and we start preparing for the next cycle. So the uterus is located anterior to the rectum, but posterior and superior to the bladder. So without a 3D map, this can be somewhat challenging to kind of visualize. So I've already taken the time to kind of carve out all of the unnecessary bits, just so we can really focus on seeing what's important to us. So from the anterior view, we can spot the bladder there, and there is the body of the uterus. So we're going to then take a lateral view, rotating all of this to the side, and here we see the bladder. There is the uterus, located posterior and superior to the bladder. This, ladies, is why when you're pregnant, you always have to pee, because that baby is just pushing right down on the bladder. And the walls of the bladder are lined with smooth muscle so that the bladder can contract, as well as proprioceptors, which detect pressure and tension on the wall, which is where the brain gets the signal that it's time to pee, right? When the wall feels tension, like it's being stretched, the brain registers that the bladder is full and you start to pee. That's what's happening with the baby, is as the baby pushes down on it, think about like a inflatable ball. When you push down on it, the walls on the outside feel tension, and that triggers the urge to pee. Welcome to the hell that is pregnancy. The uterus is located anterior to the rectum, so we're kind of sandwiched right in between these guys. Next, we will look at the ovary here, which is attached to the body by kind of a suspensory ligament. So it's held in place, it's not just floating there. But as the body of the ovary produces a ripe egg, you will see here kind of the fimbriae, these little feathery kind of, you think about like betta fish, right? They've got these like pillowy, kind of flowy fins, something akin to that. Again, the idea is to keep the current flowing into the tube so that as this egg just rips out, flowing free from the thing, you want it to get caught in a current and be pulled into the tube. So just to isolate this a little bit, remember the end of the ovary is kind of nestled in here. So you see when the egg bursts out, it really doesn't have very many options as to where it's gonna go. That's part of the design. So it will then travel through the oviduct until it encounters the uterus. And from here, we're gonna just kind of open it up a little bit so that we can see what's going on inside. And the first thing you notice is, holy cow, that thing is a lot thicker than I thought. That is all smooth muscle, baby. All smooth muscle. Just to take a little slice of the top part of the uterus, you see there's really not much space inside the thing. Most of the space inside that organ is taken up with the thickness of the walls of the organ itself. So hide this part so we see what's going on at the bottom. Notice it will kind of round off and terminate into kind of a sphincter, right? A ring which will generally stay closed. It will relax to allow the passage of menstrual fluids, or it will relax to allow the passage of a baby. Otherwise, that sphincter stays closed. It lets blood out, it lets babies out. That's about it. On the other side is the cervix. So this is what we talk about when they say, when we're going into labor and they start saying that she's dilated, she's fully dilated, we're talking about the cervix inside. The sphincter within the body has to be dilated to a certain amount. If I'm not much mistaken, it is 10 centimeters. However, not a midwife, not an OBGYN, right? Good stuff. So I believe it's 10 centimeters that the cervix has to be dilated in order for the body to, okay, we can start pushing the baby out now, but we gotta wait until we're fully there. This next tube portion is the vagina, which is the actual tube, like the interior portion. The external portion would be the labia majora, the labia minora. Another word that you will hear for the external female genitals in particular is the pudendum. Pudendum. And so there we have a nice little tour of the general area, much more comprehensive than these fun little illustrations here. So the components of the uterus, we have the body, the cervix, and the fundus. The fundus, I was wrong, is not the bottom. It is the top part, the little hat. He's wearing a little fun hat called the fundus. We have the walls, which compose the body, the main portion of the organ. The distal portion is the cervix. The word cervix means neck. It is the neck of the uterus. This is why we have a cervical region and cervical vertebrae in the neck. The middle wall is a layer called the myometrium. That is the muscle layer. The inner layer is the endometrium. That is the endometrial lining. That is what is shed during menstruation. This is also the lining that is impaired during the condition known as endometriosis. Ladies, we're familiar with the term endometriosis? Yes. Again, if I'm not much mistaken, one of the common treatments for endometriosis is birth control pills. The birth control effect is secondary. The primary reason is that birth control pills will stabilize hormone fluctuations, and it makes the periods more regular, generally less painful. Like endometriosis is marked by a very excruciating periods and cramps. So birth control pills will stabilize the hormonal fluctuations every month, kind of stabilize the cycle and make the periods bearable.
It's less of a dip in hormone drops. It's like instead of going from like this to this, it's more like this to this.
Yeah, Yeah, just to level out those fluctuations. They're still going to fluctuate. They're supposed to, but they're not supposed to be, at the top and bottom of the charts. It's supposed to be a nice like curve month to month.
Yeah.
So all of these organs, as we've seen with the ovaries, the uterus, they're all held in place by ligaments. And again, the main purpose of the uterus is it's the place where we host the party, right? It's the venue. It provides a protected, nourishing environment for growing a fetus. It's going to be supplied by sympathetic and parasympathetic motor neurons, which are sensory nerve endings going from T11 and T12. So the vagina is the portion which is the muscular tube that extends from the cervix. So we are officially not in the uterus anymore, to the exterior part of the body. It is lined with stratified squamous epithelium. Stratified means layered. So there's layers of tissue forming the walls of this thing. Squamous tells you that the cells are flat. So they are flat, kind of pancake shaped cells. Epithelial tells you it is going to form the skin of something. It's going to be in contact with the outside world. The vagina produces very acidic secretions, which is meant to inhibit bacterial growth. Again, you've got a dark, damp, moist environment that is exposed to the outside. It is a perfect environment for growing bacteria. So the body will produce very acidic secretions to make sure that bacteria do not flourish. However, you know what else does not flourish in acidic environments? Sperm. Sperm do not stand up very well, which is why in the male reproductive system, between the prostate and the seminiferous glands, and we are producing alkaline secretions to go along with the semen, so that when the sperm is introduced into the area, the alkaline and the acid neutralize each other, which promotes a healthier and more fit environment for the sperm. Fun fact. So the other name for the vagina is the birth canal, and it is the site of sexual intercourse.
I have a question.
Yes.
I'm wondering, because like whenever my wife has like really bad menstrual cramps and everything, would it, like I saw his hand in there and he could like touch the uterus in there as well. Would it be beneficial to massage like over the stomach and in the vagina as well?
I'm
Or
sorry,
is it...
say what you saw, what, his, what, who, what?
So in the picture before, when he had his hand in there, it looked like that he was able to like have a little bit access to like the outer part of the uterus.
Yeah,
and
he's
his hand
performing a
above
pelvic
it.
exam. He's performing a pelvic exam that is well outside the scope of a massage therapist. That is not a procedure that we perform.
No, I'll just...
Here's what I'll say.
Okay.
Menstrual cramping, primary cause, smooth muscle lining of the uterus. As the uterus is trying to shed, the walls are going to constrict in a peristalsis type way, to basically like squeezing toothpaste out of a tube. We're trying to squeeze off the layer that's on the inside of the uterus. Naturally, that is going to be super uncomfortable and really painful. So for period cramps, I will do abdominal massage. I am not doing any internal massage for a variety of reasons, not the least of which I've never been trained on doing internal work, so I'm not doing anything I've not been trained to do. I know how to do abdominal massage, and that I can talk about. So I cannot recommend internal work.
In
However,
reference to your question, Jed, I would just suggest a warm, like hot water pack on the belly, abdomen area.
Like how we learned in hydrotherapy.
Yeah, that would probably be very beneficial for her cramps. Just speaking from personal experience.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. So here is my fun little illustration of a human belly, right? So You're going to use a light to medium pressure, not too super deep. And you're going to start on the lower left hip. This is very important that you do this the way that I'm telling you. Start on the lower left hip. You press into the tissue and pull in an inferior direction. So start, push in, and then pull back like this. Very gentle stroke. From here, you're going to repeat the same stroke again. And again. This should not be digging deep into, this is a gentle, just push and just move the tissue very gently. As you progress, your strokes are going to start going this way. I'm just going to kind of shorthand this. So you carry across, and then you carry back down, and then you carry up, follow the colon, ascending, transverse, descending, bring it all towards the left hip. When you complete this cycle, you switch to very superficial, and then you massage in a clockwise direction. Clockwise, clockwise, clockwise on the abdomen. This is a technique that I use for helping ease menstrual cramps. It promotes circulation to the tissues. This is also one that I help use to relieve constipation. So again, when you consider what you're doing in the area and where the colon sits through all of this, you're literally kind of tracing back and gathering all of the material and pulling it all forward. They are probably going to have to poop within an hour after a technique like this. It is helping move everything around. For this reason, it is super critical that you do the massage the way that I've explained it here. You do not want to go counterclockwise, because then you are pushing the poop further away from the exit and you will constipate them. So for menstrual cramps, you still work in a clockwise direction. You're still working with the flow of the body. However, this will help relieve some of the intensity of menstrual cramps. And if you can get to it in time, it may delay the onset of your period, but it's only going to be by a day or so, and it's going to be heavy when it hits. But if you got an event coming up, I'm just saying, you can put that puppy off for a day or so, but you're going to pay for it. That's the trade-off.
I also imagine this would be helpful for like cesarean scar tissue in women's abdomen. Would that be true?
This, all movement of the tissue is going to benefit a scar. Yes. This particular technique is pretty gentle. For scar massage, we are generally having to go a lot deeper and really like break up some of that tissue, but all movement is going to benefit a scar. So you want to pull that tissue in as many different directions as possible.
Yeah.
Yep. Yes. Okay. This is not a procedure that massage therapists perform. This is outside of our scope of practice, just for the record. There's your illustration of the sagittal cut. So the external genitalia, or pudendum, as we call it, 4 major parts. We have the mons pubis, that is Latin for the pubic mound or the pubic mountain. This is the pad of fat that sits right behind your pubic hair. It's covered in hair after puberty. So when you think of the mons pubis, that's where you grow pubic hair. The labia majora and minora, the major and minor lips, are folds surrounding the vaginal opening. Towards the top of the structure is the clitoris, which is composed of the same kind of spongy erectile tissue that the penis is, which, as we explained last term or last class, it's the same structure as the male penis. It is just the analogous structure, shall we say. Located near the outside of the vagina are several glands, which will release mucus to maintain moisture, as well as other lubricating fluids to aid in the sexual act. Secondary sexual characteristics include breasts. So while not strictly speaking sexual organs, the mammary glands are modified sweat glands. So rather than simply producing sweat, they extract blood plasma from the blood. They combine it with proteins, fats, and antibodies, and they turn it into milk. There are mammary glands found in men, although they are not as numerous as in females. The size of the breast is determined by fat deposits. And the breast milk will be produced in response to prolactin. So prolactin promotes lactation, which is the production of milk. The release of milk is done in response to oxytocin. So, and this is what are referred to as milk letdown. So your breast can produce milk just fine, but many women have problems with their lactation in that they're producing milk just fine, but they can't actually let it go. And that is where lactation consultants come into play.
I also want to say about that with massage. If you have women who are breastfeeding, you will have an oxytocin release during a massage. So a lot of women will have let down on the table. So you want like extra towels under them to help them be comfortable and warn them that this may happen and it's okay on the table.
Yes, and that it's okay.
Yes.
And it's just milk. It's just milk. It's not gross. It's not like urine or vomit. It's milk. It's no big deal. It's really not that big of a deal. Pardon me 1 second. I have to let the cat out of the room.
Madeline,
She will
thank you
not
for
stop
that was
fidgeting at the
awesome.
door until I let her out. Go.
You're welcome, Anita.
Thank you.
Okay. So next up, we're going to look at the hormonal phases of the ovarian cycle. Now we've talked about bits and pieces of this, and I've kind of, described the general process. But we break basically the entire process down into 3 phases. The first and last phase are prolonged. The middle phase is rather short. The middle phase is ovulation, and this is kind of the it's the whole point. First, we have the follicular phase where the follicle is growing and developing. It is developing 1 ripe oocyte per month. Generally, 1 dominant follicle will begin to grow in response to follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone. The follicle will begin to secrete estrogen, which causes its egg to begin to ripen, for lack of a better word. It triggers maturation in one of the undeveloped oocytes. This will take about 2 weeks for the egg to become fully developed. And then when it is ready, it will burst from the ovary and then be taken into a fallopian tube. That moment is ovulation. The actual bursting forth of the egg out of the ovary is ovulation. That is a single moment in time, right? That is an event that occurs. So the first 2 weeks are the follicular phase leading up to the burst out of the egg. That is ovulation. Once that has occurred, the 3rd phase begins, the luteal phase. So the luteal phase, again, you're seeing luteinizing hormone. We're looking at the same word part here. The luteal phase is day 14 through 28. The follicle, which is left, that empty crater that the egg left when it burst out of the ovary, that crater becomes the corpus luteum. Corpus luteum means white body. It is white because it's scar tissue, right? It starts to become scarred over in that one little spot. That scarring produces progesterone in response to the luteinizing hormone. If there is no pregnancy, the corpus luteum will degenerate and the cycle will begin again. Yes.
So just to clarify, from day 14 to day 28 would be the ideal time to get pregnant, I guess, or to conceive.
That is that's when you get pregnant. is once, that is when fertilization can occur, because that is when the egg is in the tube
Okay.
or in the uterus. So the most fertile time, and again, guys, I will preface this by saying my knowledge of female anatomy is entirely theoretical and from textbook. So anyone with a uterus is far more qualified than me to speak. If I say something incorrect, I will gratefully accept the rebuke.
We'll
So
let you know.
my understanding is when you ovulate on day 14, your most fertile phase is going to be days 15 through 18. That is when the egg is like, it's got its dress on, it's on its way to the party. Like, if you're gonna jump in her limo, you better jump in right now, because her next stop is the uterus. And the impatient party girl does not wait long. When she gets to the party and no one else is there, she starts ripping down decorations. It's the pink hump, as that starts to go up somewhere around day 20, that is when we're starting to tear decorations down. And then that will continue for a week, right? The bleeding and the cramping and everything lasts about a week. And then
That
we
part
start the
was
cycle
always
over again.
confusing for some weird reason.
Well, our brain tends to want to make things nice and neat. And we say like, well, I must be fertile at the beginning of my cycle or at the end of my cycle. And the reality is you're most fertile shortly after the middle point of the cycle, because the whole first half is preparation for the event. And then that's the first half. So the last half, the first quarter, is waiting for the event to happen. Like, is anyone going to show up to this party? And then the last quarter is no one's showing up. I hate this life. I hate my friends. Let's rip everything down. And then at the end of that cycle, everything is ripped down. What do? We start preparations for the next month. So we start the whole thing over again. So if you think about the cycle broken down into 4 quarters, the first half is preparation. The third quarter is when something might happen. The fourth quarter is ripping it down. And then we start back in preparation. So
that makes a lot more sense when it's 4 quarters versus like half and half or whatever, or weeks.
now, of course, that's just a neat way to conceptualize it, right? But if you look at something like the 100,000 different fertility tracking apps that are out there, where you put your cycle information in, and it will tell you specifically which days are your most fertile, and then which days you are least likely to conceive. So, but can we just address one thing? Female orgasm is not required for impregnation. Women do not have to have an orgasm in order to become pregnant. That is not a thing. I mean, obviously it's better for everyone involved if they do, but it's not a requirement. And in the event of an unwanted pregnancy, the human body does not have a way of shutting that all down. Pregnancy is a biological process, and once it has begun, the only natural way to stop it is usually when it stops itself, through miscarriage. Most miscarriages are caused by genetic mutations, where there was a defect in chromosome reproduction or something along those lines, but for whatever reason, just the genes didn't work right. Something could have gone wrong in development during early embryological stages. But usually the reason for a miscarriage is that this tissue is not going to be viable, so the body just stops it, and then lets you try again. But no, contrary to some US congressmen, the female body does not have ways of shutting that whole thing down. That's not a thing. That's not, no. So for the menstrual cycle, the uterine cycle, right? Menstrual phase, the first 5 days, we look down here, you've got our menstrual flow, right? We're recovering from the last month. We start to develop our primary follicle for the current month, right? As we finish tearing down the final decorations from last month. We give ourselves a few days of rest, and then we move into the proliferative phase, days 5 through 14. We are proliferating, we are growing, we are increasing the thickness of the wall, anticipating the next party, right? We're hanging up streamers and getting centerpieces and tablecloths. The endometrial lining thickens in preparation for pregnancy. Cervical secretions are thinner and more alkaline. They are preparing for the arrival of sperm. Day 14 to day 28, the whole second half, is the secretory phase, the secretion phase. This phase corresponds to the luteal phase of the previous ovarian cycle. It's influenced by progesterone. Your endometrium will continue to build. Uterine glands produce nutrient-rich secretions. We are prepping for the party. We're getting ready for the party. At the end of day 28, if nothing happens, the menstrual phase, days 1 through 5. Now we've looped back around. We start at the menstrual phase. We shed the lining of the endometrium. And that is the period, is the menstrual phase.
I wanted to say something.
Yes.
The 28-day cycle is like the most like general, but lots of females have like 25 or 30 or 35, so it can be a range of days. So this isn't like every single person with
Yes.
period.
Yes, you are correct. And I will just kind of back you up by saying lots and lots of the numbers that we hear in anatomy are the numbers that are typical. So for example, how many bones in the human body? And everyone's knee-jerk reaction is 206, right? 206 bones. But 206 bones is on average. On average, 206 bones. Some people do not have 206 bones. Some people are born with extra sesamoid bones at the base of their thumb. They're little pea-sized bones, but they're there and they count. Some people develop Wormian bones in their skull, which is where the suture splits. So now you have an island of bone contained within the suture. They're nothing fancy, but they're there and they count as separate bones. Some people with polydactyly are born with extra fingers, and you get whole finger bones and everything that comes with those extra fingers. So to this point, skeletal muscles are another one. There's a list of muscles that are optional in the human body. Some people have them and some people don't. Sternalis, pyramidalis, peroneus tertius, they're psoas minor. There are a lot of muscles that some people just don't have. So when we say how many skeletal muscles are there, the knee-jerk number is 640. That is 640 textbook skeletal muscles. That is not a guarantee that every individual has 640 muscles. In the same respect to what Olivia was saying, the 28-day cycle is the textbook cycle. Individual people will vary, but when we learn about the human body, we learn about the typical way that it should operate, with 206 bones with a 28-day uterine cycle. Your mileage may vary. Some women have natural cycles that are a few days shorter or a few days longer, but the typical cycle is 28 days.
Yeah, I just wanted to be like, yeah, because some
Yes.
people are like, oh, this is how I must be, and then they accidentally get pregnant because they're like, oh, but I followed the ovulation like schedule, and then it's like, but it's not your like.
But that's not your schedule.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
it's just like,
You
no.
can't diagnose your ailment by looking at someone else's scans.
Right.
So yeah, you need a personalized menstrual calculator. Now, where can you find one of those? I don't know, but I'm sure they exist. I'm sure they exist. Some enterprising woman out there has developed one. I'm sure of it. Okay. So one point I just want to clarify. We've got two cycles going on simultaneously. The menstrual cycle, which is happening in the uterus, and the ovarian cycle, which is occurring in the ovary. So every month, the ovary ripens an egg, it bursts out, and then the crater that's left scars up and heals, and then a new egg starts to ripen and mature and bursts out, and then the crater scars and heals. This cycle occurs over and over in the ovary. In the uterus, the menstrual cycle is what is taking place. Now, the two cycles are like two gears, right? They're happening directly related to each other, but these are discrete cycles. I just want to clarify these are two discrete cycles. So the menstrual cycles are regulated through the hypothalamus, the pituitary, and the ovaries. These are the primary glands. The hypothalamus releases GnRH in response to both hormonal signals, right, as it monitors the levels of estrogen and progesterone in the blood, as well as neural signals. The pituitary gland will release luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone in response to GnRH. So this is just like we've learned before, right? The hypothalamus regulates the pituitary. The pituitary is the master gland that regulates everyone else. So the hypothalamus, the boss, tells it GnRH. The pituitary responds by sending LH and FSH. The ovaries pick up those two hormonal signals and they stimulate follicle development, and they start secreting estrogen in response. As the follicles stimulate estrogen, estrogen increases follicle development. So there is a positive feedback loop going on. As the estrogen and progesterone are increased, that begins to inhibit the production of LH and FSH through a new hormone, which is called inhibin. It inhibits. So inhibin inhibits the production of LH and FSH. So as one ramps up, it triggers the lowering of another. When the egg is not fertilized, which is going to be most months, luteinizing hormone is inhibited, the corpus luteum degenerates. That cycle will then begin again. When we talk about the crater that's left and it becomes it seals with scar tissue and it leaves a little bit of scarring on the ovary, that scar is distinct and discrete. We can go in with tools and we can spot them on the ovary. It leaves a remnant called the corpus albicans. The corpus albicans is a white scar that is left after the corpus luteum dies. So think about like acne scars, right? You end up with a zit and it's really bad and it damages the skin. And then when it heals, there's a little mark that shows where that damage has occurred. Same type of deal is going on with the ovaries, as all these little eggs that they've got, the eggs rise to the surface and burst forth. That leaves little pock mark scars on the surface of the ovary.
Would they go in and count them to see how many she lost? I mean, what is the
Oh, no, probably not. I mean, to count them, probably not.
Is this what leads to like the ovaries like breaking down over time? How much it's been like torn apart?
Yeah. So like with most things, the older it is, the more decrepit it gets. Right? But like anything, the more you use it, the more worn out it gets, like knees and hips.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Wow.
Yep.
I never knew that. Interesting.
Okay. So this slide, I know it's written very small, but we are bullet pointing the hormonal cycle. It's the same cycle we just talked about. Nothing new. It's the same cycle. We've just expanded it a little more and really like listed it out in bullet point form. So the whole cycle, as always, starts with the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus is the control center. It's the boss. The hypothalamus releases GnRH. That goes to the pituitary. That is its signal down to the pituitary. The pituitary, the master gland, then releases its two hormones, LH and FSH. Those two go to the ovary. When the ovary receives these two signals, it starts developing a follicle. The follicle will produce and secrete estrogens. Estrogens will maintain secondary sex characteristics, so that's a normal function. It also triggers thickening of the uterine lining. The uterus has received the invitation to the party, and they start planning accordingly. The anterior pituitary, when the time is right, will release a surge of luteinizing hormone that triggers ovulation. That is the event. The egg bursts out in response to a surge of luteinizing hormone. Now, the egg bursts out of the ovary and is using fluid current, just like the current in a river. It rips out of the ovary and is carried into a fallopian tube on to live its best life. The ovary is left with a crater, a depression where the egg has burst from. That follicle becomes the corpus luteum, the white body. As it heals, it starts to secrete estrogen and progesterone. This estrogen and progesterone are carried to the hypothalamus in the blood, causing FSH and LH to decline. So we start easing down on the hormones. Meanwhile, estrogen is still thickening the uterine lining. We are still preparing for a party in the uterus. Progesterone leads to an increase in vascularization of the uterine lining. A lot more blood vessels, lots more blood, ergo more nutrients, getting ready for an implanted fertilized egg. Sorry, my mind blanked. So if no fertilization happens, that corpus luteum, which is degrading now, will degenerate, and that will lead to decreased estrogen and progesterone. Decreased LH and FSH will cause the vessels in the uterine lining to constrict, reducing blood flow. The lining will then start to slough off. The smooth muscle in the wall of the uterus will assist with pinching and churning to help break the material off on the inside. That's what leads to the painful cramping. As the lining shoves off, decreased estrogens and progesterone will lead to a GnRH release, which is where we started. So the whole cycle repeats again. Good stuff?
Will we need to know all the hormones and the order of the cycle?
The basic hormones, yes. The basic hormone cycle, yes.
Okay. So like, and what gland secretes?
So the slide you just went over, we need to know. For
So it's like GnRH, LH,
FS.
FSH, and then yeah.
And where do those hormones go?
To the ovaries.
Good. What happens there?
In like hormone or
No,
just
as
what
the results
happens?
of LH and FSH, what then happens?
The
Pushes the follicle.
the ovum, doesn't it mature? Or does it burst out?
The follicle starts to mature. The egg
Okay.
starts to become ripe. And as the follicle matures, it starts releasing what two hormones?
Estrogen and progesterone.
Good. So when the ovum matures, it bursts out of the ovary in one event that is called ovulation. What triggers ovulation? What triggers ovulation? The trigger for ovulation is a spike in luteinizing hormone from the pituitary. When luteinizing hormone spikes, the egg ovulates. So, what happens next?
And the mature egg goes into the fallopian tube.
Yeah, so the egg that has just left the ovary heads to the fallopian tube. And then onto the uterus. So, meanwhile, this follicle, let's look at this guy. It had an egg that was ripe. And then when ovulation happened, the egg burst out. So now we're left with this open pit. That is called the corpus luteum. As it heals, it is still producing estrogen and progesterone. But as it heals, the amount that it is producing starts to reduce. It is reducing the amount of estrogen and progesterone as it heals. When it is done healing, it is known as the corpus what? Corpus
Albicans.
albicans. When it becomes the corpus albicans, the production of estrogen and progesterone is almost done. But let's see, estrogen, progesterone, when these guys stop production, that triggers the release of GnRH in the hypothalamus. And now we've started the whole cycle again. So the whole cycle starts over again. As GnRH is produced, it travels down to the pituitary, which produces luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone. That then goes down to the ovaries. The whole cycle starts over again. Is this good stuff, guys? Okay. Tell you what.
I like flowcharts.
I love flowcharts.
It's helpful to see it like visually.
Yeah.
Because these two cycles are not like simple at all. This is happening over and over and over and over and over. It's complicated.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So I snagged a screenshot. I will post it in Moodle just so you guys have this written down. You also have the recording of this video so you can take your own screenshots, but at least you'll have like a JPEG image that you can take and look. So
And this
before we
cycle
move on,
itself is
go ahead, say it again.
this cycle itself is called the Ovarian
Menstrual cycle?
cycle? Okay, I'm getting them all mixed
Oh,
up.
well, we're kind of describing both together,
Okay.
to be honest. Because remember, both of them individually, you're not seeing the whole picture, right? So individually, we talk about, oh, well, this hormone goes up and this hormone goes down, but you don't see the effect of that until you look at the other cycle when you're like, oh, well, because this happened, now the wall falls apart. And we're like, wait, well, why did this go down? Well, you can't talk about why it didn't go down without looking at the other side of the story. So here we're kind of describing both together because we're trying to make sense of this big picture. We got to see how the systems are interrelated. But I would say, let me pick a different color here. I want to go with, let's go with a light. I'll go with light purple. Somewhere around here is where the fork kind of splits. So all of this portion has been ovarian cycle. Now, when we start talking about uterus to fallopian tube, that's uterine. That's going to the uterus. Let's talk about uterine cycle. And then when we get back down here, what we're talking about, corpus luteum, corpus albicans, we're still in the, we're back in the ovarian cycle. So when the follicle matures is where our story kind of splits. We can stay in the ovary and continue the ovarian cycle, or we can follow the egg to the uterus, but now we're looking at a whole second cycle. I hope I didn't just make this way more complicated for you guys. I'm not trying to. Oh no. Okay, there we go. Back to the original. I love the iPad, man. Okay. Any other questions about anything we've gone over so far? Any questions? Okie dokie. Let's take a break. This is going to be a nice little stopping point. When we come back from the break, we're going to talk about fertilization. So this is a nice little pin to put in where we are now. Let's take 10 minutes. I'll see you guys back here very soon. All right, we are back. Okay. So, next topic we are going to cover, since everything we've been talking about has been assuming that fertilization does not occur, so the cycle will just continue repeating itself month after month. Let's talk about the occasion when fertilization does occur. So fertilization describes the union of the egg and a sperm to form a zygote. So the egg and the sperm each are called gametes. These are cells that sex cells, gametes, eggs and sperm. When two gametes come together, they form a zygote, which is one cell. The zygote has 46 chromosomes. So it is one cell that finally has a complete set of chromosomes. That is the single cell that we are all soon to be descended from. We'll look here a little bit more closely. We saw the sperm model up close yesterday. Let me just pull some things up real quick. So first, we're going to look at the sperm model. We will recall from last week, we have the head of the sperm. Most of the head is nucleus. That's the cell part of the sperm, and most of that is nucleus, which is containing the genetic information. Whoops. The middle portion contains coiled mitochondria. They provide the energy necessary for the rotation of the tail so that the little sperm can swim. But when the guy reaches the egg, right at this neck portion, the tail part of the sperm detaches. Only the head, only that cell part actually penetrates into the egg. So what you are seeing here are the three primary stages. The contact with the egg wall, we start to penetrate the egg wall, and then the head delivers its genetic material, right? The head delivers inside the egg, the tail detaches and dies, and the woman's body will flush all that stuff out. The important thing has been delivered, right? We've delivered the package of goods. Here we have the oocyte. Cutting inside, you will see a few familiar structures. We'll start with the nucleus. Then you have these teal colored gummy beans. Those are mitochondria for energy. And then you have this very neatly arrayed here, this very neatly arrayed, almost grid. These are cortical granules. These are small granules that will be triggered by fertilization. So these are the things that are waiting to get fertilized. The head of the sperm is trying to not just touch the egg, it's trying to touch one of these little nodes. And when it contacts one of these nodes on the inside, then fertilization has occurred. Along the outside ring, we have a wall called a cornea radiata. That's the radiating crown of cells on the cell. This is a thick layer of tissue that kind of surrounds the cell wall. So this is one of the things that the sperm has to fight its way through in order to get to the egg. And then here we have what is called the first polar body. Doesn't it almost look like a little placenta kind of tucked in there? Almost like a little egg yolk. So the first polar body are small non-functional cells consisting of a small amount of cytoplasm and a nucleus, resulting from unequal division of the primary oocyte. If fertilization occurs, resulting from an unequal division of the primary oocyte, and if fertilization occurs, of the secondary oocyte. This is going to be well beyond what we need to know, but we have the egg. Isn't that fun? Oops, there we go. So again, the zygote finally has 46 chromosomes, 23 from the sperm and 23 from the ovum. Once the egg has been fertilized, it will travel to the uterus. Remember, fertilization usually occurs in the fallopian tube. That's usually where the sperm and the egg come together. Then the zygote travels the rest of the way down the fallopian tube into the uterus. When it joins, or when it enters into the uterus, it will find there's a whole party ready to go just for its arrival. We've got streamers and tablecloths and centerpieces. We've made sure the lining of the uterus is extra thick and padded with lots and lots of blood vessels, therefore lots and lots of nutrients. Conception is the joining of the sperm and egg. Conception marks the beginning of pregnancy. The next phase there is implantation. So the cell has to become embedded in the uterine wall, but by that point, the cell should be much, much larger. So when we finally have a zygote, we are looking at the first full human cell. But again, it is one single cell. One of its first orders of business is to start dividing. So one cell becomes two through a process called cleavage. Now, I know when we hear the word cleavage, we start to think of, right, like the chest line, but think about what that word is telling you, right? The tissue has become cleaved in on itself. In embryology, one of the words that we use is invagination, where the tissue, the round cell, starts to pinch inward, and then the two membranes completely separate, and now we are left with two separate but identical cells. The two cells will split into four by going through that exact same process each. Two become four, four become eight. They continue dividing until we come to a larger structure called a morula. But when you get to a magic number, and forgive me for not knowing what the magic number is, it might be 64, but I might be way, way off. But there is a set number of cells where through the physical mechanics of all of these things dividing and replicating, they self-organize themselves into a hollow ball of cells. That hollow ball is called a blastocyst. A blastocyst. That is the structure that embeds in the uterine wall. So by the time implantation occurs, you are already several dozen cells at that point, not just the one. The implanted blastocyst will embed into the uterine wall, where it will receive a nice, warm, bloody welcome. And I say bloody in the positive term because there's lots of blood and nutrients. And so begins fetal development.
I had a question.
Yes.
So, fertilization most commonly happens in the fallopian tube or the fundus?
Not in the fundus, but just
Not in
in the
fundus,
tube
just the
in
tube.
general.
Okay, okay, because I've heard it so many, like, I've heard, yeah.
Yeah, so
Different
just to recap our terminology. And I don't.
I think you might be confusing it with sometimes an egg can implant itself in after it's been fertilized into the fallopian tube.
Yeah, like it doesn't go all the
Okay,
way.
so remember.
So some
we
people
learned-
think that's the same thing. Yeah.
No. So we learn about what's supposed to happen, right? We learn about the textbook way it's supposed to go. This is the textbook way. One of the errors that could go wrong is that instead of implanting in the wall of the uterus, the egg implants in the wall of the fallopian tube. Now, when we look at that diagram, you see the thick walls of muscle and the thick endometrial lining that have developed to prepare for this egg to implant. The fallopian tube is not muscular. It does not have a rich lining. It is not prepared, nor does it function to hold a developing baby. What will happen is the baby will keep growing until it bursts out of the tube. That is called an ectopic pregnancy, and it is life-threatening. And usually we will induce an abortion because that will kill you. That will kill you. That is a legitimate medical reason for an abortion, because it will kill the mother. First of all, it will be painful as all hell as your tube swells and finally bursts. But once the tube bursts, the baby will die anyway. It's not going to develop outside of a uterus. And second of all, now that tube has ruptured, you are internally bleeding, and without treatment, you will bleed to death. So ectopic pregnancies are an immediately, like, we stop the pregnancy. You've got to try again. So fertilization, when the egg and the sperm come together, that happens in the tube. And as the egg continues to travel, it is dividing 2 into 4 into 8. It's getting larger, but by the time it pops out of the tube into the uterus, it should be a hollow sphere of cells. That's the blastocyst, and that's the thing that's doing the implanting in the uterine wall. Good stuff. Good stuff.
Yeah, so I'm gonna make a comment real quick.
Yes.
This slide and the next slide, if you have any questions about it, I suggest you go to OMSI because they have the most spectacular section of like display of, you know, actual human beings in a week by week, day by day sequence of
That's so cool.
amazingness, intelligence, and it tells you exactly what happens during each time, and it's just really awesome science.
That sounds super cool.
I recommend you go look at it. It's been there like my entire life, but it's got really good information. You'll learn a lot.
Yeah, in Tampa, we had a very similar thing. It was called MOSI, which you guys have OMSI, but it was the Museum of Science and Industry, so MOSI.
Gotcha.
It was the exact same thing, right? It's the exact same kind of thing. They have like big dinosaur skeletons and all this stuff. And one of the cool things they had was a series of jars of formaldehyde with this tiny little squiggle of cloudy tissue all the way up to like, that was a baby, like a little baby shoved into a little jar. But I mean, you could see there was like 16 of these things on the way up, all preserved in formaldehyde.
You have
And
like almost day to week.
Mosey didn't have that many. I think
And
Mosey had
around
about
rooms, like it's
16 or
everything.
something.
Yeah, it's really, really
That
cool.
sounds
It's
like
not,
it's worth the trip.
they're not in jars. It's like a wall, basically.
Yeah, they're like
So it's very like,
something,
yeah.
but it's quite interesting and very informative.
Definitely sounds like something I would be interested in.
You should check it out.
I will.
Cool.
I will. I went to Mosey a dozen times. I went to see the Human Bodies exhibit. This is my stuff. This is what does it for me.
Well, I went like a week ago. It was
Oh, cool.
still there.
All right. So fetal development. The process of developing a fetus is known as gestation, and gestation in humans generally takes 37 to 40 weeks. That is about 9 months. So between conception and delivery.
Things?
Yeah.
Just about the numbers. Also, sorry, Paw Patrol is playing in the background if you can hear it for the toddler. But a lot of first-time mamas will go as high as 42 weeks before they're induced. So that's not the cap. And 40 weeks is actually 10 months of time, not 9 months. There's no rhyme or reason to why we call it 9 months, but it's 10 months of time.
Thank you. Thank you. So the 9 month period, which is actually 10 months, but we keep saying 9 for some reason, is divided into 3 3-month segments known as trimesters. During the first trimester, this is the riskiest time. This is when most of the stuff going on is going on at the cellular level. So if there's going to be a mistake in DNA transcription or organelle functioning or the elementary stages of embryological folding, where you start to make the first folds that will become your spinal cord and your head and your anus, if those folds don't happen the way that they're supposed to happen, then what you are left with will not function. And so the body will terminate the pregnancy on its own. That is a miscarriage. It is most likely to happen in the first trimester than in any other trimester. But in this stage of development is where the first organs are starting to form. It's little rudimentary brain, it's rudimentary heart. As a woman enters the second trimester, organ development is mostly complete. This is generally when we can do an ultrasound to determine, the slide says gender, but I'm going to make a correction. That is sex, not gender. You can determine the sex of a person by looking at what is between their legs. Sex is chromosomal and it is biological, but gender is a performance. You perform your gender in front of an audience by the way you dress and talk and act and do your hair and the activities you engage in. That's, gender is a performance. The third trimester, so moving into like month 7, 8, 9, is when the female really, this is when you can tell she's pregnant. Like you might have been able to cover it with a sweatshirt, you know, they may have had to shoot the actress sitting behind the bar, you know, from the chest up for most of the shots. They can put her in baggy clothes to kind of cover it up. They'll put them sitting on couches a lot in the scenes. But man, by the third trimester, there ain't no hiding it. Like that chick's pregnant. Weight gain, the final development stages are in the final organs that will develop are the ones that the baby has been able to do without, for the most part. It's lungs, hasn't needed lungs really. So that lung tissue has taken its good, sweet time developing. In the third trimester, we're coming down to the wire. So we're putting the finishing touches on the lungs. And finally, we are ready for delivery. But first, there is a whole new organ that develops along with the baby called the placenta. And it is much misunderstood, and there's a lot of weird ideas about this thing. Number one, it is an organ. It is a combination of 2 or more types of tissue that combine to accomplish a definite function. It is an organ, albeit a temporary one. You grow a placenta for the baby, and then you deliver the placenta along with the baby during childbirth. So the placenta detaches and it leaves your body, never to return. And if you get pregnant again, you will grow a whole brand new one. So each kid grows their own. Cool. It is a separate flat structure that is formed by both fetal and maternal cells. So a little bit of the baby, a little bit of the mama. This is where the blood kind of comes together and we can trade off waste products and oxygen and things like that. It does secrete hormones, which makes it an endocrine gland. So it's producing estrogen, progesterone, prolactin, so that we start producing milk, relaxin, which relaxes the soft tissue of your joints, which prepares you for childbirth, because I don't know if you knew this or not, but your hips come unhinged in the front. If this is news to you guys, I should really take the time to explain this because it is fascinating and has a lot of repercussions for other things down the line. If you don't mind, I'm going to take a minute to talk about this.
Let me just say it's fascinating, also terrifying. Yeah, terrifying and fascinating at the same time.
And for some pregnant people, extremely painful.
Well, yeah, that's just to be assumed.
So,
Nobody got out of pregnancy without anything.
right. So as we have learned about hormones, hormones are released into the bloodstream where they go on through the body to have effects on anything that has a receptor to bind to that specific hormone. So the placenta releases a hormone called relaxin. The target is connective tissues, specifically the kinds of tissues that hold your joints together, like ligaments. The joint that is specifically being targeted is the pubic symphysis, which is an amphiarthrotic cartilaginous joint, very much like your intervertebral joints with their discs between them. So the pubic symphysis here, when the cells of this tissue become exposed to the hormone relaxin, that disc of cartilage starts to detach from one of the two pubic bones. Which bone it is kind of random, and it doesn't really matter in the end of it. Ultimately, what will happen is one side or the other will completely detach from the disc of cartilage, meaning if you look down the pelvic bowl, these two guys are no longer attached to each other. Your two hip bones are totally loose. The only place your hips are still held together is on the posterior side through the fifth lumbar vertebra, the sacrum, and the two ilia. But remember, hormones go through the bloodstream and all tissue gets blood. So all of your joints have relaxed. All of the joints have started to loosen up. Even though we were targeting one, the hormone hotline is not a specialized hotline. It delivers a message to everyone, and everyone has to obey the hormone hotline. So as all of your joints start to loosen up, the idea, again, is if those hips are detached in the front, then they can expand wider to allow for the passage of a baby. This effect is temporary. After childbirth, the body stops producing relaxin because you've delivered the placenta, right? The placenta's gone. So there is no more relaxin. So the soft tissue responds by tightening itself back up. Now, before I go on, everybody's good on what I just talked about. Everybody's good. Cool, super, awesome. Now, for something that has absolutely nothing to do with massage therapy or anything you will ever really need to know about, but I like to nerd out about this stuff. Here we go. When you separate this disc from the bone, this surface of the pubic bone, which, hold on, let me find the right, there it is, bam. That surface on the pubic bone where the disc of fibrocartilage was attached to, it is called the symphyseal surface, the surface of the symphysis, the symphyseal surface. The exact look and shape changes at a very regular rate throughout your life. When I say very regular rate, what I mean is that landmark is one of the landmarks we use in forensics to determine how old the skeleton is. Like, how old were you when you died? Because it changes at such a regular rate throughout life. Now, when you look at these images, I understand it's hard to see what you're looking at. And even when you study forensics, this takes a long time to develop the talent for looking at these things and visually determining how old it is. It takes a lot of practice, and you have to see hundreds and hundreds of skeletons in order to train your brain into specifically what you're looking for. For now, just trust me, you can tell the difference. Trained professionals can tell the difference. So let's look at this one real quick. What you are looking at is the pubic symphysis, just the surface of the two pubic bones when they come together. So because these things change regularly throughout life, we can estimate about how old the person was when they died based on looking at this landmark. Now, what we just talked about was that the pubic bones during childbirth separate from each other. Bones are living organs, just like any other organ. They are not these dry, dead things that are inside of you. They are alive, and they grow and develop and change over time according to the forces that are applied to them. So when the bone undergoes this transformation, with the disc of cartilage being ripped off of the bone and then sewn back onto it, that changes the surface in a way that resembles a 10-year increase in age. So what does this mean? It means if I get the skeleton of a female and I look at various landmarks throughout the skeleton to determine how old this person is, we can look at teeth, We can look at the ends of their ribs. We can look at their synovial joint surfaces, which tend to become more decrepit when you age with arthritis. We can look at the bodies of vertebrae. There are many things through the body we can use to estimate age. When we examine the pubic symphysis of a female, if every landmark in this body is telling me this is the skeleton of a woman in her mid-20s, but this landmark on the pubic symphysis looks like it's a woman in her 40s, she has had 2 kids. Do you guys follow me there?
Sorry, that's nuts.
Yes.
I was
Each
on-
birth event, each pregnancy, when the pubic bones separate and then they have to grow back together, that makes that landmark look like it's 10 years older than it is. So if you have a skeleton of a woman that looks like she's 30, but she has the pubic symphysis of a woman in her 60s, that's 3 extra decades, she's had 3 kids. Or let's more precisely say 3 birth events. Because number 1, she may have had multiples, right? That could have been twins or triplets. Or she may have still given birth to a stillborn, or the kid may have died after birth, like died in childhood or something like that. We don't know. She may have also had the kid, but given them up for adoption. So she doesn't identify as a mother, but biologically, she has had 3 children. And that is all we can tell from the bones. All I can tell are the facts. I cannot tell the social schema of what is going on, whether the kids died in childhood or she gave them up for adoption. I can't tell any of that. What I can say is this is a woman in her 30s who has given birth 3 times. That is what I can tell from the bones.
That's wild. So that means my mom is twice as old as she is. So she's like 42,
Well,
I think. Yeah,
just again,
according
just to clarify,
to her,
it says
to the
this
synthesis.
landmark,
Yeah,
this bony landmark will appear older than yes.
so she's
Again,
had 4
I hate to
kids. So it's like, yeah, according
how old
to
is she?
her she's 42.
Yeah.
So she's like
so
80 in this,
yes.
according to
So
this.
her pubic symphysis should look something like this one here in the center. That's going to be about mid-40s. And then, in fact, what it will look like is something more akin to this. Maybe not to this extreme, but the idea is you can tell that there is, like, you're losing a young pubic symphysis. Look how strong and ridged. I mean, that's got a robust attachment to that cartilage, man. That cartilage ain't going nowhere. But once it's ripped off and now it's not attaching to anything, the bone will respond and start eroding the bone material. Well, then we attach it again. So now we start to grow material, but then you get pregnant again and we rip it off. So we start to erode those things, right? This kind of like you grow it and then you wear it down, and you grow it and then you wear it down.
So does it like
Look at this one. Do you see how smooth that is?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So
are the
then-
smooth ones the ones that are from people who have not had children? Or
no, just older. Just
oh,
older.
old. Okay, I'm back.
Yeah. This is the typical one just as you look throughout life. And these phases are generally 5 to 7 or 5 to 10 year ranges. And then again, these are typical. Your individual results will vary. Also, women's pubic symphyses mature on a set scale and males on a separate scale. So you got to look at them differently because of childbirth. It changes the way you have to estimate women's.
Wow.
Because men's hips generally do not come apart. Ever. We hope that they never come apart in your life, but men's don't come apart. So men's are not only much more predictable, but you can narrow it down much closer in men than you can in women.
So I'm curious.
But
So
you
my
don't look at
mom-
one landmark to determine age. You look at every landmark. So you never are just looking at one thing and saying no, you got to look at 24 different landmarks to get an estimate of what's going on. There's too much variation in the human body. Just wanted to throw that out there. It's not, we don't look at one thing. Sorry, Jed, go ahead.
No, you're good. I just wanted to ask because my mother has had 7 birth experiences since I'm the youngest of 9, and she's like 65 right now. Yeah. So I was curious, like, what would something like that look like? Because if that's the case, hers is like over 100 years old.
So all
I
we
know,
can
poor
do
mama.
is estimate, right? I can show you like kind of
Yeah.
examples of a few, but here is the pubic symphysis of that's a older teenager, early 20s, no kids. That on the left there is 17 to 23, somewhere abouts. The one on the right, I would say like proper old. Like that, when I say proper old, I mean that's 75 to 80 or above, like old. Not like, oh, but she's still sprightly. I mean, like, do not let her fall and break her hip. So
Gotcha.
that is what you're looking at. That's what it looks like.
Okay. Cool. Thank you.
Yeah. Pubic symphysis. So here's some illustrations. And again, I understand that it's hard to really see what you're looking at, but generally what you're seeing is just the slow kind of erosion of the shapes over time. These aren't like diagrams where it looks exactly like this and then it looks exactly like that. It's just meant to show you kind of like how it's wearing and being washed out as time progresses.
So David?
Yeah.
Because of the wear down that you're showing of a person that has had childbearing years and whatnot, is that why a person that has had children versus a person that has not had children, the likelihood of one of them falling and breaking their hips and their bones being a lot more brittle than the other, is that a possibility?
It could be, but I'm not sure. I do know the biggest risk factor for what you're describing is menopause. And again, the hormonal changes that accompany menopause trigger the decalcification of bone and therefore osteoporosis, and so they get more brittle.
Gotcha.
I would say the higher predictor of osteoporosis is the sex of the individual rather than whether the person has had kids or not. But that's a good question.
I also know pregnancy could be a calcium suck on the bones because if you are not getting your calcium, baby takes priority and just takes it away. So there is a possibility that you're creating a deficit that'll show up later.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. Yeah, you had to bake a whole skeleton from scratch and you got to pull those ingredients from somewhere. And if you need calcium phosphate and calcium carbonate, buddy, it's coming out of your skeleton, man. Yeah, absolutely. Some evidence suggests that the more times a woman has been pregnant for at least 28 weeks, the greater her bone density and the lower her risk of fracture. In some cases, women develop osteoporosis during pregnancy or breastfeeding, although this is rare. So if evidence suggests that the more time she's been pregnant, the greater her bone density and the lower her risk of fracture, then that would suggest the opposite, that her body becomes adept at conserving and storing calcium, since she's had to pull major depletions every time she's had to bake a new skeleton, that her body just gets more efficient at storing it.
You just say
That's fun stuff.
Bake a new skeleton.
Bake them from scratch in the oven.
Hey, fun in the oven. I got it.
Yeah, you get it.
That was great. Thanks.
Okay, so you will never need to know the forensic applications of the pubic symphysis as a massage therapist.
But I love it anyway, and I will tell everyone I know.
I went to school for forensics and specifically for bone forensics. Like this is what I nerd out on. My professor, by the way, fun little claim to fame. My professor got her doctoral degree based on her thesis. She was the one who determined it's 10 years. When a woman has a kid, it changes it by 10 years. That was her thing. She figured out the 10 years. That was her. That's how she got her doctorates.
That's great.
I think one thing that does apply to massage therapy, well, kind of applies, is that pubic symphysis action is a lot of women end up with really bad pubic symphysis pain while pregnant, like excruciating pain. Like I think it's 20-something% of women end up with pubic symphysis pain during pregnancy. And if they don't know what it is and they're asking you to fix muscles, it's not a muscle. You don't want to destabilize by undoing stabilizing muscle.
Yes.
So be aware of that coming through your door.
Absolutely. Yeah, taking the skeleton and kind of like leaning it forward just a little bit so you can look down, you really see how kind of isolated and alone that joint is, or it really doesn't have a whole lot of support. Even looking at it kind of this way, we'll start adding in muscles and you'll see a few adductors and a few abdominal muscles is really all it gets. So it's, I mean, honestly, guys, let's be honest with yourself. Really, how strong are your abdominal muscles? I mean, are they really strong? What about your adductors? Are they like super developed? Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So that joint doesn't have a whole lot of support. And then on top of all of that, you start giving it relaxin, and now the joint starts like unsuturing itself. Yeah. Now we understand why there's so much groin pain, not related to the baby, right? Because this starts well before the baby is on his way to be delivered. This starts months in advance, preparing the body for this watermelon that's about to pass through this tiny little tunnel. Well, tiny little tunnel. So we're gonna have to open this guy up. It takes the body a few months to prepare for that.
Does your anatomy application that you have on right now, that thing, does it have the option to show you a pregnant person?
It does not, unfortunately.
I'm just curious because
I will say they add new stuff constantly. So this list here that I've had started at a lot smaller, and they keep adding newer, more and more models. But
just curious because a lot of changes happen. Like, I mean, the entire body changes.
Yeah.
Pregnancy, and that's kind of like.
And like this thing showed, like, there's a video on a coronary stent. So like how they put a stent in the heart. I mean, the app does way more than what I use it for, but and like little courses and dissections of cadavers and stuff. I mean, it's all included. Once you're subscribed to the thing, you get all the stuff. But I don't think it does pregnancy.
Just asking. Also, I have a weird fun fact that I learned from Moxie. Yeah. Apparently, I can't remember if it's the 3rd or 2nd trimester, but if the pregnant mom suffers organ failure, the baby or the fetus will send, white blood cells and basically all of its information to help fix the injured organs of the mother, which is crazy, crazy awesome. Just thought that was cool.
Interesting. I did not know that. All right, so we left off talking about the placenta. We said relaxin, and that's what launched me onto my whole rant. So we're going to pick right back up where I left off. The placenta is secreting hormones. Relaxin is one of them, but also progesterone, estrogen, prolactin to trigger the production of milk, and HCG. Human chorionic gonadotropin, a hormone used for maternal recognition of pregnancy, produced by trophoblast cells that are surrounding a growing embryo. This is the thing that your pregnancy test is sniffing for. When you pee on the stick and it gives you the 2 stripes and you're like, oh crap, I've got human chorionic gonadotropin in my pee. So the placenta is the site of exchange of gases, nutrients, and waste. So this is where the placenta absorbs oxygen and nutrients through diffusion from the mother's blood. It provides the baby's waste products, the carbon dioxide and the poop and all the other stuff, again, through diffusion into the mother's supply, as well as provides a protective barrier for toxins and diseases. The baby's blood and the mother's blood never strictly intermix. There's layers of membranes that material will diffuse through, but the two sets of blood are never just mixed together straight up. Once the placenta has done its job and we have transferred our gross waste-laden blood into fresh arterial blood, it is then transported back to the baby through the umbilical cord, which plugs into its umbilicus, which is your little belly button. So here we are looking at the very tightly interwoven vasculature of the placenta. Starting at the bottom left corner, that is the umbilical cord plugging into the placenta. So then we kind of zoom in from there. And again, we don't need to understand the names of the blood vessels or anything, but I'm just showing you that the baby has arteries and veins, mama has arteries and veins, and these arteries and veins do not merge together. They are woven around each other, but they do not mix. All right. So what kind of changes can we expect during pregnancy? Well, weight gain is one of the more obvious ones. But again, since you're creating an entire person, you know, that's going to add a little bit of extra weight. Increased metabolic rate. The fires of your body burn a little bit faster. Because again, you are burning a lot of calories, consuming a lot of energy, growing an entire human in your belly. So yeah, you burn through nutrients a little bit faster than you did before. We start to increase our fluid retention, which increases our blood volume. Since again, we're about to need a lot more blood. So we increase the fluid so that we can produce more blood plasma. We increase our respiratory rate and our respiratory volume. So we not only breathe more frequently, but we also breathe deeply with wider expansions of the chest cavity. Again, this is to supply adequate oxygen that will be needed to fuel the growing cells. There are pressure on pelvic veins because of the actual weight on the pelvic floor of the growing baby. As you apply pressure to the veins, it pushes blood backwards, which damages valves, right? And as the blood flows backwards, that leads to varicose veins, generally in the lower leg. The mom also starts increasing her nutrient requirements. This is what we talk about when we say you're eating for two. Yeah, the baby can't find its own food, so mama has to eat all of the food for herself and for the baby. Calorie requirements go up. Breast and uterine enlargement. Breasts enlarge because they become engorged with milk. The uterus enlarges because the baby was a cell and suddenly it's the size of a peanut, and then it's the size of a grapefruit, and then it's the size of a football, and then it's the size of a baby. So yeah, uterus gets bigger as it stretches to accommodate. Joints are looser due to relaxin. We talked about that. But everything else has to adjust also, right? As the uterus gets bigger, we'll think back to where the uterus was positioned. The colon and the bladder, all of the abdominal organs above, all of those guys have to shuffle for position and move out of the way as the uterus gets bigger and bigger. The abdominal muscle becomes stretched as it bulges forward. As it bulges forward, it alters your center of gravity. So now the lower back has to bend even further back into extension in order to center yourself over the weight. So you start getting an exaggerated lordotic curvature and a lot of stiffness in the low back and a lot of low back pain. Since you're leaning back with the low back, the upper back has to bend forward to keep your head over your hips. So you start to develop a hunchback. You've got tightness through the thoracic muscles, tightness through the posterior neck. Hamstrings and glutes become weakened. Hip flexors start to get tighter as the hips start to roll forward. They roll forward because they're being pulled forward by the baby, spilling out over the front of the hips. So they roll forward. Now the low back has to pull backwards, creating a very complex tension pattern running through the body. All right. Next, we have delivery, labor and delivery. So through that complex exchange of hormonal information happening between mama and baby, baby will signal hormonally to mama that he's ready. Mama will send a red receipt to that text message acknowledging, and these hormonal exchanges trigger labor. By this point, the baby should have started shifting its position. The baby, which is already constantly like moving and twisting around, should have generally positioned himself upside down. So the head is pointing downwards. As the baby drops onto the cervix, it puts pressure on that tight little sphincter at the bottom of the uterus. Pressure on the sphincter triggers the release of oxytocin. The release of oxytocin triggers all smooth muscle to contract, especially the smooth muscle in the walls of the uterus. So push, oxytocin, oxytocin triggers a contraction, which pushes the baby down harder on the cervix. So the cervix responds by releasing oxytocin, which squeezes the uterus, pushing the baby down harder onto the cervix, which triggers the release of oxytocin. And here we have a positive feedback loop. Each time the baby pushes harder and harder against the cervix responds by releasing more oxytocin, triggering harder and more frequent contractions, which just accelerates the whole process even more. Delivery is generally divided into 3 stages. Dilation, which is where the cervix is dilating, getting larger and larger. I think we said 10 centimeters, which is about like this. That's about 10 centimeters, somewhere around in there. Stage 2 is expulsion. So that's the show, people. The baby is expelled, evicted, one might say. As uterine contractions increase in strength, they finally push that baby out, hopefully head first. Sometimes the baby is born feet first. That is breech, when a baby is born breech. Or sometimes they're born butt first. So they're born like one of those Olympic divers that's got their legs flung up over their head and they just drop down butt first. Those are generally much more complicated deliveries. You need a doctor. You cannot trust a doula or a midwife for something like that. Usually you need a hospital. You need a hospital with medical people. Breech births are not rare, but uncommon. It is not typical that a child will be born breech, although it does happen. So the third stage, now you've got a baby, right? The baby is out. He's screaming. They slapped him. He's breathing. You're holding him, right? Oh, we're done, my beautiful baby. Look what we did. And then they snatch that baby from you because we are not done yet. You got to keep pushing. Keep pushing. Yes, again, it feels like you just pushed yourself inside out. And you kind of did. But now we've got to deliver the placenta. And so usually what will happen is the doctor will place a firm hand on the bottom side of your abdomen and push up while grabbing hold of that umbilical cord and pulling. And you literally just peel that sucker off the wall and out. Now that the placenta is out, we can say the childbirth is done. Now we move into the recovery phase. We move into the cuddling our precious newborn baby phase and the breastfeeding phase. Notice how at no point do we ever talk or mention the placenta ever again. Placenta has no more function to serve. Usually it is thrown out as medical waste. But some of these hippies are ingenuitive. One of the strong points of a placenta is that it contains an abundance of stem cells. Stem cells are very tiny baby cells who do not yet know what they want to do when they grow up. They do not know if they want to be a liver cell or a brain cell or a kidney cell or a bone cell. They haven't decided yet. The body has not hormonally stimulated them to prod them into developing into whatever the body needs. Stem cells, because they are undifferentiated, they aren't different, they are all the same. These are the best ones to use for like stem cell research, right? Think about it. If I take your placenta, your very placenta that your mom delivered when she had you, I have your undifferentiated stem cells, and I can put those in a freezer one day. And maybe a few years down the line, maybe you have a heart attack and you need a new heart. Well, if I have your stem cells, we can stimulate them into becoming heart cells. And then we grow a whole new heart that belongs to you, cellularly, genetically belongs to you. So number one, no waiting for a donor on a transplant list. We can just grow a new heart. Second of all, when we transplant it, it's yours. Your immune system has nothing to say about it. We did a transplant and all of those cells have the right security badge on their jacket. And so the immune system leaves them alone. And now we have no need for immunosuppressant drugs. There will be no risk of rejection or complications of rejection after the transplant. This would revolutionize the way we do organ transplants in this world. There would be no more donor lists of waiting on a list of someone to get a new heart or kidney and waiting for people to die, because all organs would be your own organs. So, does the placenta have future medical value? Yes, it does. Do you gain that value by eating the placenta? I think not. I don't think so. I have never been present for childbirth. I am not an expert in childbirth. I'm not a doula or a midwife or an OBGYN. But I don't, medically, I don't see how you would get a benefit, because you would just digest all of that. It will be broken down in your digestive system. So, I mean, yeah, you get back some iron and some raw materials, but like you could just do that through food, like regular food, supplements, vitamins.
I have a question.
Yeah.
That's an amazing theory. I enjoy your placenta theory and I agree with it wholeheartedly. But I have a question. So say, and it's a weird off Broadway deal. Say the mother was not so great during pregnancy and was, say, drinking alcohol or on drugs, and the poor baby infant was delivered moderately healthy, but say had half a heart. Would the placenta be viable to build more heart, or would it be also toxicated or contaminated?
It would also be contaminated by the drugs, yes.
Okay, well, that's
Because remember, mama, this is why I use the analogy of baking. You are baking that baby from raw materials harvested from your own body. Drinking doesn't just affect your body, it is affecting the raw material of your body that you are using to build that baby's body. There, from that respect, there is no distinction between. So no, the placenta would not, it would be damaged. Yes, I don't think it
wasn't
would be viable.
encouraging that in any way.
Now, could we, now,
not for that.
through medical science and medical advancements, could we help repair the placenta? Maybe, but that's not usually the way we do it. Usually we throw the placenta away. That's just Western medicine, that's generally how it's done. Barring the mom wanting to do anything else with it, like freeze it or eat it or put it in a smoothie, whatever they do with the placenta afterwards.
Sometimes they make it in pills, I guess.
What?
It's weird. Sometimes they make it into pills and the mom takes them.
Oh yeah. Yep. And again, you do get the benefit, I mean, realistically, you do get the benefit of re-ingesting all of those raw materials, right? The amino acids, the proteins, the fatty acids, all of the building blocks that you put building that structure, you get to get all that stuff back. I'm not discounting that. What I am saying is, beyond that, I don't know that there's much benefit of eating the placenta that you couldn't get just through dietary supplements and things like that. So, I mean, you're going to eat protein again, right? You're going to eat steak and meat and you'll get iron again. I mean, you'll get all that stuff back through your diet. One, the the most prescient reason that I can see of keeping a placenta is to freeze it for stem cells later on if you ever needed an organ transplant. Now that's going to get big and bulky if everyone's placenta is like cataloged and frozen somewhere. That's a lot of tissue to have to maintain and store. So I'm just saying.
I feel like the benefits outweigh the fact that we have to store them somewhere.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah. But stem cell research has had its funding savagely curtailed.
Oh yeah,
So,
because
but
it's a great plan.
to be fair to the other side of the argument, placental stem cells are not the most ideal for use in stem cell research. To be fair to the other side of the argument, the best, most undifferentiated cells are embryological cells, the cells of the embryo itself, which means in order to use those, we would have to take the embryo, which is the kid, that's the fetus. So where do we get those kinds of cells from? And the answer is abortions. We get them from aborted fetuses. We take those embryonic cells and then we use those in our research. That is one of the reasons why they are so against stem cell research, is that we are getting a benefit from the abortion of babies. And so that's the heart of their argument, is that we are benefiting from what they view as the murder of babies. Now, we can talk about whether it's a baby or a fetus or a cluster of cells or whatever. But the fact of the matter is, conception has occurred. It is human DNA. Whether life begins at conception or birth, that's a philosophical argument. All I'm saying is, from the science of the matter, we can do what we need to do from tissue in the first trimester before the tissue resembles anything human. Abortions are not done in the third trimester, right? The only abortions that are done in the third trimester are catastrophic due to protecting the life of the mother or the fetus or the child. Like, no state in the United States is performing abortions just on demand in the third trimester. If you want an abortion, it's got to be done early in the pregnancy. There's a lot of controversy about where we draw that line, for sure, but I'm not here to take a side on the stance. I'm just here to show this is why there are two sides to this argument.
And I did
Placental stem cells are simply not sufficient to do all the things that we could do with stem cells. We would require embryonic stem cells, which means abortions. We would require the material from abortions. That's the fact of the matter. So, yes.
It was stem cells from the baby to the mom's organs that were failing that were fixed.
There we go. That sounds right. That sounds right.
It took so long to figure that out.
Yeah.
But that's good.
Okay, so next thing we're going to talk about. Good stuff, everybody. Good stuff. All right. I just want to see how far along we are real quick. Okay, we are almost done. Almost done. So, lactation. Lactation is the production of milk through the mammary glands. We talked about those modified sweat glands. They siphon off blood plasma, mix it with fats, and turn it into milk. During pregnancy, estrogen and progesterone will trigger the breasts to enlarge in preparation of milk production. The hypothalamus will stimulate the production of milk through prolactin. Prolactin stimulates milk production, right? Prolactin makes you lactate, produce the thing. Oxytocin makes you release the milk. So you can have a full bladder all you want to, but if you can't find a toilet, you can't pee. So you just run around with a full bladder. That's the difference between milk production and milk letdown. So as we age, right, we talked about the age-related changes in the reproductive system in men last week. Really not a whole lot of change. Steady decline in testosterone production, enlargement of the prostate glands, but testes will continue churning out sperm every day, millions every day until he dies. Even if he's like 105, they may be old and not very good swimmers, but he is still producing sperm every day. Females, on the other hand, are, as we said, born with all of the eggs that they will ever need, way more than they will ever need in their lives. Around age 40, their ovaries begin to become unresponsive to gonadotropins. This is due to the collective scar tissue from all of those ruptured follicles. So after a certain amount of time, all the little scars have started to make the ovary a little bit more numb to hormonal signals. This is perimenopausal or premenopausal. Somewhere around age 50, the menstrual cycle altogether stops, and that is menopause. The low estrogen levels will lead to the reproductive organs will begin to atrophy. Since the ovaries produce hormones and eggs, and we're not making eggs anymore, and they stop producing hormones, the body doesn't keep structures around it doesn't need. So we start to break down the ovaries. They start to deteriorate. There's a reduction in overall secretions. So typically women experience vaginal dryness. They also have hot flashes and mood swings, due usually again to the hypothalamus receiving fluctuating hormone signals. And they have a susceptibility to osteoporosis. We've talked about this one several times. Right? When they get menopausal, their body starts pulling calcium out of the bones like a retiree gone wild, just withdrawing all their retirement funds. So massage can help alleviate some of the symptoms of PMS. We talked about this earlier. This was the, come on. This fun little diagram where we talked about our basic massage routine. Clockwise, following the colon, starting at the exit, progressively moving clockwise around the abdomen. Your final strokes starting on the right hip, going around towards the left hip. Massage can also help with symptoms of pregnancy and birth. I'm sure you have heard of prenatal massage by this point. If you have not, there is a whole division of massage called prenatal massage. It is dedicated to moms and babies. And that's all you do is just massage pregnant women and babies. Infant massage is also a thing. Many massage therapists who like to work with babies specialize in craniosacral massage. It is a very, very gentle form of massage, using very light pressure. But a lot of babies really benefit from craniosacral therapy after childbirth because of the intense compression forces that are put on their very delicate, mostly cartilage skulls. So also another one that we do a lot is a gentle massage on the head to help kind of like smooth and round out that cartilage so that the head forms more rounded instead of more pointy, which tends to happen when that baby gets extruded out of a vagina. It tends to like smush their little head in like a cone head. After pregnancy, you know, women's bodies have just gone through what could be described as a trauma. Your hormones are all out of whack. Everything else is out of whack. Your sleep cycle is a joke. Food is inhaled, much less digested. And you've got a fucking kid and they're really annoying and really needy. And so you can imagine there's a lot of crap going on. Naturally, a lot of women tend to be averse to being touched at this point, especially by the husband. Massage can help reacclimate a woman into her body, can help her kind of reassociate with her body and help lower the stress levels that are considerably high at this particular point. Massage, by relaxing the body and stimulating the parasympathetic nervous system, also helps ease the nervous and endocrine systems, as well as aids the reproductive system. by returning blood flow so that we can heal. Good stuff. All right. Well, that is everything I have for today. Do you guys have any questions over anything we have talked about today? Anything we have discussed? Anything you would like to see again?
I was hoping to know some benefits, precautions, for massage during pregnancy.
Benefits we just talked about.
Oh, just like relaxation.
It helps with the symptoms of pregnancy and birth. So remember we talked about the tension patterns that they start to hold, right? Let me flip back to here. So all of these tension patterns, we help alleviate those. We can help alleviate the stress on the joints through gentle range of motion. Remember, their joints are super loose, so you don't want to go stretching them hardcore, but carefully guiding the limbs through a safe range of motion. Avoid massaging the pregnant belly because you're just going to get that kid riled up and they're going to start like thumping and jumping around and she's trying to relax. And the last thing you want them to do is like punch a kidney when she's laying on a table. We use lots and lots of pillows to cushion women because when they're pregnant, they've got a lot of weird pressure and a lot of weird places. So we generally have to kind of recline them so they're like seated up a little bit. It does make the massage a little more effortful on our part. You got to push a little more than you would like to. You can't really lean onto them as easily, but you can't lay them face down because they'd smush the baby, and you can't lay them face up because the baby smushes bladder and kidneys and the inferior vena cava, returning blood to the heart. So you stifle blood flow. Also, baby takes a lot of space, which squeezes the lungs, which makes breathing a little more difficult. So having them lay face down or face up, it might interfere with breathing. So being reclined is a generally easier position to be in, and side lying. And when you lay a pregnant woman side lying, they have like an army of pillows. They are like holding a pillow. There's a pillow under the belly for the pregnant belly to rest on, and there's a pillow between their knees to keep the thighs up and separated. And then a huge pillow under their head. So that they are flipping comfy when you set a pregnant woman up for a massage. You lay her on her side. You start on the top half. So you like shoulder to ankle, and then you flip her over. And then you do the second half, shoulder to ankle, and then you flip her reclined. And then you do like upper chest, head, neck, scalp, and then like front of the legs. But you do like generally you avoid the pregnant belly itself because pressing and moving around gets the baby excited and they start moving around, and that's a lot. That's a lot. What else? Improving circulation. As with every other massage, right? We improve circulation, which also improves oxygenation of the blood, increases the transport of nutrients and the removal of waste products, which the baby is taking a lot of nutrients and producing a lot of wastes. Generally, we avoid the ankles due to reflexology points associated with the uterus. The fear is that we will stimulate contractions and send her into labor early. I would argue that if you could send a woman into labor by massaging her feet, then we would be doing that at every hospital. Like that would just be the way what doctors did. So generally nowadays, the way we induce labor is through a hormone. We inject you with a hormone called Pitocin. That sends you into labor, like real quick and in a hurry. So yeah, if the doctor needs you to go into labor, like right just now, he will give you an injection and you will go into labor right just now. Massaging the ankle is more of a precautionary wives' tale type thing. I highly doubt that you're gonna send anyone into labor massaging their foot. That's just the contraindications. However, pregnancy massage is indicated for typical healthy pregnancies. If there is any other kind of complication, generally we avoid massage. common pregnancy conditions, gestational diabetes for one. That's a pretty common one. High blood pressure, toxemia is another really common one. It's diagnosed by a protein in the urine, but it's a blood condition, and the way they treat it is they put you on bed rest for the rest of your pregnancy. From the second they diagnose you with toxemia, you are in bed and you rest, and you get up to pee and change the channel, and otherwise you stay in bed. Toxemia usually clears up after the pregnancy, just as gestational diabetes clears up after the pregnancy, generally. And with those kinds of conditions, you work with what you have. If you can't work deeply, or they can't have massage at all, or their doctor will tell them what they can and can't have, generally.
We have to be aware of preeclampsia as well.
Preeclampsia is toxemia. It's the same
Oh,
thing.
right.
Yeah. Yeah, welcome to medicine. Everything has two different, preeclampsia or toxemia. We're talking about the same thing. It's a blood condition treated with bed rest, diagnosed by protein in the urine. What else? That's generally it. There's not, I think we covered pretty much everything. They can't lay face down or face up. They gotta usually lay on their side. Be extra careful manipulating their joints, because their joints are much looser. So you could dislocate something. If you stretch them too far, too fast, you could dislocate something. You got to take it easy. Nice, gentle, comfortable range of motion, just to move the joint around. You ain't trying to stretch nothing or nothing. Yeah, that's what I got. Good stuff.
Good stuff.
All right. Well, guys, that's everything I have for you.
Cool.
So this recording will be posted on Moodle here shortly. The endocrine quiz was due today before class. Reproductive quiz will be due next week, I believe. Next week, we are covering digestive system and reviewing for the final.
Get that big long homework thing.
Yeah. Yes. Good stuff. All right. Have a wonderful week. I'll see you guys next week. Same bat time, same bat channel.
Thank you.
Thanks, David.
Yeah.
Thank you. Have a nice week.
My pleasure. Take it easy, guys.